the foreword to your book, Bill of Obligations, you say you were concerned about the future of democracy. It is a dangerous time. Are you any less concerned about democracy today than you were before the November election?
No, I remain concerned about democracy, not a panic, but concern. Look, we just had an important election. The fact that, close to 100 million Americans who are eligible to vote didn't vote, that does not exactly make me feel comfortable. The fact that a lot of Americans are voting based upon information, shall we say, that is short of being accurate or much less comprehensive. We still don't have a country that's requiring, or in many cases teaching, civics in our schools. Public service is an opportunity for not nearly enough Americans as it ought to be. I see the discourse, David. You know, it's just so polarized. The most interesting thing going on in American society is a phenomenon that political scientists called sorting, S-O-R-T-I-N-G, where increasingly Americans are leading separate lives, separate churches, separate places they live. The red states are getting redder, the blue states are getting bluer. They're not coming into contact with Americans who have different points of view. They're listening to different or watching different cable stations or on different websites. And I worry about our ability to operate together, to compromise, to meet common problems. So yeah, I mean, we've avoided a crisis like January 6th. I get it, but no one should think that somehow the problem has passed.
So on the sorting issue, what could be done about it? Are there mechanisms we could come up with, nationally, locally, to actually make us deal with one another? Because right now, it does seem we sort of go to our respective corners and reinforce our prejudices.
Well, I think it's a good question. There's several ways to answer it. Those states where people are leaving might ask themselves, are there reasons that people are leaving? It might have something to do with taxes or the quality of public schools or some other thing. And I say that from a state known as New York, which has a real problem with those issues. So I think there's some things but once it happens, I mean, you can't tell people they can't move. And that's where I think expanded public service opportunities would help. Tom Brokaw used to write about the greatest generation, where people would come together, work together, in some cases die together. Obviously we don't want that, but the idea of public service, bringing people together, civics in the classrooms would also help. You know, we're a year and a half away from the 250th anniversary of this experiment. Well, what better time to have something of a national teaching about what it is to be an American? What are not just your rights, but what are your obligations? What do you owe this country? What do you owe your fellow citizen? So it ought to be a time to do some of those things. So I think sorting is a phenomena, and what we've got to do is try to figure out ways to give Americans some common experiences to offset the silos.
I know that besides writing the book, you didn't leave it there. You followed up by trying to encourage public schools to teach civics, for example. What kind of progress are you making?
I wish I could sit here and tell you I've made enormous progress. I haven't, some because I'm doing a few other things, but it's tough. You know, school systems are very decentralized in this country, and these issues, so it's hard to break through, where the teachers are already strapped. Teacher training is not one of our strengths in this country. Teachers' unions, shall we say, can at times be something of an obstacle. We've also loaded other requirements on the schools which get in the way. There's no consensus on what we should teach. It's interesting. When it comes to civics, even federal legislation that would provide funds for this often begins with preambles that say nothing in this should be construed as suggesting this is going to be, there should be a national civics curriculum. And I read that and go, why not? If the whole idea is to knit the country together, why would we want to have kids in Oklahoma learning different stuff from kids in Arkansas? We do want a national curriculum, but it's just very hard in this divided polity of ours to reach consensus on that.
A priority, but is it a federal priority? We have President Trump about to take office, who campaigned on eliminating the Department of Education. Yeah. I mean, when you talk about having money federally for this, there's a lot of movement that say it should be left up to the states or the local government.
I hear you, and ideally it should be a federal priority if you want to have a one-size-fits-all federal curriculum so all Americans have it in common. But I take your point. We can't agree at the federal level. Things often get more done at the state and local level. Resources are there. So that to me is the second best. And I think it's going to be up to governors and others to basically say, okay, we're going to do it in our state. We're going to have public service programs, and you see it in states like California taking the lead there, and we're going to have civics programs. We're also going to have programs at the state level. You're seeing New Jersey introduced a requirement for it to teach what's called information literacy. So young people learn to navigate this flooded environment where there's information but also tremendous misinformation, and how do they know what's a quality source, what's a fact, and what's an opinion. So I think things we're going to have to do, and I take your point, I think it's going to be less difficult to get done at the state level, even if in principle it might be a second best solution.
You mentioned New Jersey and California. As you go around and really talk about this, are you seeing an openness or even an appetite at state levels? And do you see it in, if I can use the expression, in red states as well as blue states?
The short answer is I do. Most Americans know there's something amiss. When I have conversations, I've done town halls around the country and so forth. People know there's something wrong. They see it. They watch it. This is not the America, particularly older people they grew up in. It's easier to reach people of, shall we say, our generation. A little bit tougher with younger people, because in many cases they haven't seen democracy work the way it should. They associate an American role in the world stage with Iraq and Afghanistan rather than with the Gulf War or Korea or World War II. So it's a little bit harder, I find at times, to break through with a younger generation. But I think, yeah, Americans know, they get it, that something is not quite working, and we've got to fix it. We can't assume it's going to get better on itself.
There is an American problem, many people would say, on this front, but is it only an American problem? Because we are seeing democracies challenged around the world. I mean, look at South Korea, what's happened in South Korea. Look at France, look at Germany. I mean, anywhere you look, it feels like right now, democracies are really on the defensive.
Well, I probably separate into two things. I actually see Korea as a good example of democracy, how resilient it is. You had a president who overreached with martial law, the parliament pushed back, the people pushed back. I actually take that as a good sign. I would say in a lot of the world, it's not so much democracy that's in trouble. It's a bad time to be an incumbent. Because take Great Britain. There you had the incumbents pushed out, but it was a conservative government that lost, and a Labor government came in. And much of the rest of the world, the rotation has been in the other direction, including in ours. And then I think the challenge is for the new crowd to make democracy work. And then they'll be tested. We'll have a midterm in 2 years. We'll have a new presidential election in 4 years. Germany, France are going through some terrible difficulties. Japan is going through a difficult succession. We'll see what happens in Mexico with the new president there. Again, I think it's very hard for incumbents to defend the status quo. Most societies are saying we don't want more of the same. We want change. Populism, so you bring the new gang in, but then they're going to become the incumbents. And so long as rotations of power can continue to happen, and that's what I get a little bit less comfortable. That means you've got to have a strong media, you have to have checks and balances on political power, so if people either rule badly or rule in ways that are contrary to the law, that there's recourse, that ultimately they can and will be held accountable. And that's what's so important. That's what's really instrumental to democracy.